Marhaba. In this video, I'm going to talk about al-fi'l al-naqis, what we sometimes refer to in English as defective verbs. These are verbs where the last letter of the root is a vowel, either a waw or a ya. As you probably know by this point, vowels in Arabic are a little bit slippery. They're shapeshifters. They can change form or disappear entirely depending on the circumstances. And that's exactly what we're going to examine here. In this video, I'm only going to look at Form 1 defective verbs. That's because the derived forms 2 through 10 are a little bit more regular, and we're going to have a separate video on those so that we can examine them as a set. So in Form 1, al-fi'l al-naqis has 3 main conjugation patterns, depending on the vowel in the verb stem. I've conjugated these past tense forms here for both huwa and ana so that we can see the difference. As you can see, the vowels that we have here change form depending on the conjugation. So take this verb, masha, which means walk. He walked, or ana mashaytu, I walked. A pretty basic verb, right? In the past tense, conjugated for huwa, we've got an alif maksura that turns into a ya in first and second person past tense conjugations. That's very predictable. The great thing about each of these paradigms is that once we know one verb that fits into that template, we can apply it to any other verb that looks the same way. So alif maksura in the past turns into a ya for first and second person conjugations. Same thing if we were talking about enta or enti, mashayita, mashayti. And in the present tense, it also turns into a ya. Huwa yamshi, ana amshi, etc. Second pattern, we have a regular alif for huwa that turns into a waw with all the first and second person conjugation patterns. Huwa da'a, ana da'utu, and then it also turns into a waw in the present. Huwa yad'u, ana ad'u, etc. Our third version, our third paradigm, da'a means call or invite, by the way. Third paradigm, we're using nasiya, which means to forget, a very useful verb, where we have a ya for the huwa in past tense that stays a ya for the ana and enta conjugations, and then turns into an alif maksura in the present tense. Huwa yansa, ana ansa, etc. Again, it can seem very random and arbitrary, but the great thing is that once we know just one verb in each of these categories, we can apply it to any other verb. We have another verb, baka, which means to cry, that also has an alif maksura at the end, so I know that I can use exactly the same set of rules as I can for masha. If I want to talk about myself crying in the past, I can say ana bakaytu. Same deal. And if I want to talk about the present tense, for huwa, I know that I'm going to have a ya for that vowel that's the last letter of the judr. For da'a, there's another word, bada, a very useful verb, which means to seem, to appear to be. Bada, I see that alif in the past tense, I know that I can say badawtu for myself. That's a little bit strange, we don't encounter it much. I seemed to be X, but in terms of conjugation, it works. And in the present tense, I'm going to keep that wow. Same idea. Yad'u, yabdu, same pattern. One last example for the last pattern, we have a verb baqiya, which means to remain or stay, or sometimes survive. Baqiya. So in the past tense, I remember nasiya, and I can say baqitu. And In the present tense, because I know that it has an alif maksura, that yansa has an alif maksura in the present tense conjugation, I can be confident in conjugating this verb yabqa with an alif maksura as well. Again, once we know these correspondences, we can apply them across the board on any other verb that fits that paradigm. So we use normal prefix and suffix endings for past and present tense verbs that are naqis. There are a couple of little wrinkles, little idiosyncrasies that I do want to bring your attention to. First is that for the past tense feminine third person singular conjugation, hiya, we're going to drop that vowel entirely. And the reason is that we can't have two sukoons next to each other in consecutive letters in formal Arabic. So if we wanted to say she walked, for example, you might be tempted to say mashayt, but the problem would be that we would have a sukoon on the ya and a sukoon on the ta, and that's a no-no in Arabic. We can't do that. So the solution is just to drop the ya and say mashat. Same thing with the others. Hiya, da'at, or hiya, nasat. We drop the vowel entirely, which might be a relief at this point, right? The other thing is that if we're conjugating for most conjugations that have a suffix in the present tense, we're also going to drop that vowel. So if we're talking about, so that's for hiya in the past tense, but if we're talking about hum, all of them, for example, in the present tense, you know that typically we add a ya and then an at the end in a present tense marfu'a conjugation. So if we were saying they all are walking, we're not going to keep the ya. You might think, okay, yamshiyun, there's not a problem with that, but the truth is that you sound is not loved by Arabic, so we're just going to skip it and say yamshun or yad'un. We're not going to have two wows there that would just look a little bit silly. Or yansun. The one exception to this is dual conjugations, where we are going to keep that vowel. So, for example, just one example, if we were saying they walked, the two of them, huma yamshiyan, is what we would say. So just for the dual in formal Arabic, otherwise we're going to drop those vowels in the present tense for any conjugation that has a suffix like that. One other thing that I want to mention is that if we're creating an active participle, an ism fa'il, out of a fa'il naqis like this, it's going to fall into a category of words we call manqus. Same judr as naqis, right? Manqus. So they're defective nouns, or really defective nouns and adjectives, but we call it al-ism al-manqus, which take a special set of case endings. We have a separate video on this that you can go and watch if you'd like to learn more, but just so you know, typically in the indefinite, if an ism fa'il is masculine from one of these verbs, then it's going to take special case endings where even in the marfu'a, we're going to add kasra tanween. You might expect mashi to fit that fa'il pattern, and that would be true only if it were definite or if it were mansoob. But in marfu' and majroor, we would say mashin, so like someone, a walker, one who is walking, or someone who is calling. We could possibly see da'in, or a forgetter, one who forgets, could be nasi. Once again, there's a video on that, on how that works and when we can expect it, that you can go and view at your leisure. But if you encounter these somewhere, and especially if you see that a helpful editor has put that in there, then it's likely that what you're looking at is likely, not 100%, but it's likely that it's an ism fa'il from a fa'il naqis, a verb that fits into this special paradigm. As is usual in a case like this, rather than attempting to remember all of these different particularities in the abstract, what I would recommend is that you pick a verb that you already know, or pick one of these new verbs that you like, that appeals to you emotionally, and just make that your template. Really get to know masha yamshi or baqiya yabqa, and make that your referent for any other defective verb that you might come across. That's going to be a slightly easier way to do it most of the time. And as you can see, the naqis has its quirks, more than a few, but we get a ton of verbs that fall into this category in Arabic, and it's well worth knowing how to use them capably and confidently.